Good afternoon and welcome to this month's edition of the Cyber Savvy CEO. My name is Angela Dingle. I am the president and CEO of Ex Nihilo Management. We are a technology consultancy based in Washington, D.C. I'll be your host for today. The Cyber Savvy CEO is a monthly webinar series for C-suite executives where we discuss cybersecurity from a business standpoint. A lot of times when you have these conversations, people are talking about technology. And we know the importance of discussing this from a business risk standpoint. So each month we share real world scenarios or experiences to help you to understand what you need to do to protect, detect, and respond to cyber attacks. So it's not really a matter of whether or not you will become a victim of a cyber attack, but when. And we know from experience that leadership is key when it comes to protecting your business against cyber threats. So I am joined today by Stephen Covey, the Chief Strategy Officer for Kavia Technologies, which was formerly True IA LLC, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. Stephen has more than 32 years of professional knowledge and experience in cybersecurity, enterprise architecture, and telecommunications. He assumed full operational responsibilities for managing True IA or True Information Assurance in 2008, and then in 2021 sold that. So congratulations again to you. I was right there sitting on the sidelines as that happened and excited to see that progress for you. Prior to establishing True, Mr. Covey was the CIO, the Chief Information Officer of Information Systems Security Solutions, Inc. And so for those of you that might be familiar, that was IS3, where he was responsible for developing IS3's information assurance and enterprise architecture business models. He also worked as a senior consultant with Booz Allen Hamilton, where he performed duties as a network manager and information assurance senior subject matter expert for the Pentagon's background too, right? And he's also had a distinguished career with the United States Air Force. Thank you so much for your service, Steve. So he graduated cum laude with a bachelor's degree in business and in information systems from Charleston Southern University. I used to have an office in Charleston. And his technical education also includes a host of other professional certifications and degrees, but his greatest accomplishment has been serving his wife of 29 years, Valerie, and his two beautiful daughters, Tiara and Karina. Steve, welcome to the Cyber Savvy CEO.
Thank you, Angela, for that warm introduction. And I'm pleased to be invited here today and look forward to our discussion.
Good, good. So before we begin our discussion, I'll just go through a couple of housekeeping items. So for our guests, today's meeting is being recorded. So your cameras and your microphones have been disabled to ensure the quality of our recording. We'll be answering questions at the conclusion of the presentation. However, as I've said before, please feel free to use the chat button. I will make sure that I'm monitoring that to type any questions that you have during the presentation. We'll do our best to answer them as we go along. And then the recording for this presentation will be distributed to anyone who registered after the session. All right, so why don't I go ahead and get us started? So as we celebrate Cybersecurity Awareness Month, which is every October, it is a great chance for us to focus on our responsibilities as individuals and as business owners, right? This is the 18th year that professionals like Stephen and I have dedicated time to ensuring that the stakeholders that we are responsible for, whether that be our employees, or our clients, our families, or our friends, learn how to reduce their cybersecurity risks and protect themselves online. So this year's theme is Do Your Part, Be Cyber Smart. And today's discussion falls right in line with that. So I will just get started. So if you've heard me speak before, and I know, Steve, you and I have talked about this, you know that I believe that cybersecurity is a people problem, right? So what do I mean by that? 80% of all the security breaches are the result of internal errors, not external errors. There are some industries like healthcare where it's insiders are more prevalent, right? And in some instances, there are technical configuration problems, but more often than not, it's going to be an internal error that caused that security breach. And I say it's a people problem because it's a person that writes their password down on a piece of paper and leaves that exposed. It's a person that writes the code that they use to hack into your computer. It's a person that decides to steal your identity and take money from your bank account. It all boils down to people. And so that means that we have a responsibility both individually and corporately. So what are your thoughts about that? What are your thoughts about that being a people problem?
Okay, great. Yeah, the forum that you have established here is really the best forum by which I want to respond, because we are corporate CEOs and other execs that have, we employ people, and we have a responsibility not only with our companies, but everybody else that we come in contact with. And so to give it a magnitude of the importance of the job that we have, I wanted to read some stats that comes from the Small Business Administration with regards to small business. It says that nearly half of all Americans, which is 47.5%, are employed by a small business. This means that 58.9 million Americans are employed by small businesses, and businesses that have 100 people or less employ the largest percentage of people in America. We have a huge responsibility as small business owners to make sure that our people, which is, the largest percentage of Americans, are working for small businesses. We have a responsibility to ensure that our companies and our staff are well informed about cybersecurity so that we can make America, more secure.
Thank you. Some of the work that I do is in the women's business community, and when you think about when you look at this challenge of small businesses from a women's standpoint, women businesses are growing at a pace that outpaces our male counterparts, and a lot of them are small businesses, right? So this number of small businesses across the country and the impact that we have on the economy and the workforce is really significant. And that makes this cybersecurity discussion all that more important because we play such an important role. So thank you for sharing that. Now, one of the reasons that I asked you to come on this month and talk to us is because you've created a cybersecurity pledge, and I'm going to share that with our guests, and then I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about that and to tell me your thoughts, like what prompted you to create it, and what you're looking for people to do as a result of having seen this cyber pledge.
Right. Yeah. As you can tell by the first couple of lines there, it's really an ode to the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. And I created this pledge probably about at least 6 years ago or so. And part of one of the divisions that we have in our organization is called the Cyber Academy. And as part of the Cyber Academy, that year we were doing summer camps within Prince William County. There's a couple of high schools that both have cybersecurity as part of their curriculum as well as IT. And for those camps, I wanted them to really get a context for their responsibility as individuals, as we're talking about today, and what the impact that they might have as an individual. And I really wanted people to take away that we are cyber citizens. And within this nation, as a citizen, we have responsibilities, not only for ourselves, but we ought to be looking out for our neighbors. And the cybersecurity, or actually cyber realm, really, it has no borders. You can't define it by nationality, because the internet traverses across the entire globe. And so there are no borders, but we individually have responsibilities to make sure that, first off, our information and data is secure so that we don't become a middleman in different kinds of attacks where people can utilize our resources against us or others. And so therefore, if we understand that we are all interconnected and my data, if it's compromised, can ultimately lead to someone else being compromised, which we should not want as a citizen. We want to make sure that we protect one another. And so that's where I really wanted to hone in on with those kids, and then ultimately through my own organization and other organizations that I'm a part of, I share this pledge with people just to get a mindset that we're all in this together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing the background on that. I think it's really important because if you think about our children and you think about the workforce now, right? We have 5 generations in the workforce, and our up and coming generation is very tech savvy and has grown up with some piece of technology in their hands. And their ability to understand their responsibility as a cyber citizen really can determine how secure our individual corporations are. And then I think as leaders, we have an obligation. When I talk about a cyber savvy CEO, it's not just technology, right? It's really understanding what our role is as leaders within our organization, because we get to set the tone at the top. I can't tell you, and I know you have, when we talk about our backgrounds, we both work for some of the largest technology companies in the world. And when you work for those companies, one of the worst things that you can see, and so this goes to our listeners today, as the owner of the company or the high-ranking official in the company, you really have to set the tone for what it is that you expect. So if my team sees me walking around and I don't want to have any antivirus software installed on my phone, or I don't want to have to change my password, the IT team has to do this whole special thing for me because I don't want to follow the rules. What kind of precedent am I setting? What kind of message am I sending? And so if I decide that I want to take a pledge like this and make this pledge a part of who we become as a corporation, I think it does a whole lot to help people understand collectively what our responsibilities are and what we need to do to protect our individual corporations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We can't stress that enough. And I'm really glad, that, our mindsets are akin, because we need to make sure that we promote this as much as possible across the globe here.
Mm-hmm. I'll definitely do that. So this will go out to our team, and I'll get our marketing team to make sure they put it out on social media. So what are you hoping people will do with it when they see it? Are they signing it? Are they posting it in their offices? Tell our listeners what they ought to do with this pledge.
Yeah, so certainly back in the day, we used to have posters that were cybersecurity related, and you could put those on your desk, and just a reminder really for yourself and those that might pass your desk. And that's what I would expect for people to do here is put this up somewhere close to your workspace, so that you can see those words more often than not, and something I hope would sink in, because it becomes more of a routine for you to secure your data and your systems, versus it being an afterthought. So and absolutely share this with whoever you come in contact with. Maybe you push it out to your children, and that can also take root with them sharing it with some of their friends. So that's my hope, is that it give more attention and become rooted in people's thinking.
Mm-hmm. And this is a really good time of the year. I'm not so certain that the organization that came up with Cyber Awareness Month would have thought about strategic planning, but I just returned from a strategic planning retreat, and it was just sending an email to a colleague who is in the planning stage now. So how great would it be if business owners were thinking about, well, how do I incorporate this into my strategy? So kind of think about that as a way that you can use this cyber pledge as well. So let's talk about just this overall concept of promoting cyber awareness. I think that it's extremely important. I can't say enough about how much as a leader, you have to set the tone at the top. I almost feel like a broken record saying that here. But how important do you think it is for business owners to promote cybersecurity awareness?
Yeah, so I would find it, hard to believe, and I'm not sure what the stats are on this, but I would imagine that in some form or fashion, every business in America has IT. They have cyber. They're using IT somehow, and if you are, you need to be aware of the potential risk, threats, vulnerabilities that are related to your use of IT or cyber. For those that are online here and started doing math, I've been securing systems since the 80s. And back then, as part of DoD, they used to call it automated information systems. And in securing those systems, I really became a purist for computer security. And when information assurance had its birth, which is close to around 2000 era, there were some tenets that were associated with information assurance. There were 5 of them. They are confidentiality, integrity, availability, authentication, and non-repudiation. Now, in the cybersecurity realm, we don't speak those kind of tenets anymore, but that's core. Those 5 tenets are core to how you secure systems, and you can't get away from it. And I really wish that as we transition from information assurance to cybersecurity, we didn't lose sight of what those tenets were, or are, I should say. And it was and is my desire that cybersecurity be demystified. Doesn't have to be hard. And if we can do those 5 core tenets and get a hold of what those things really mean, because we all use IT, we have to use those practices to generate, to your point, Angela, it could be planning, could be processes, build these things into how you use IT. So that's my way of really wanting to say to business owners here, cyber is your business. Because you're using it as a resource, you have to secure it.
Thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to pick apart a couple of things that you said, right? When we look at those statistics about small businesses that you started with, again, I'm a little partial to women business owners. So when you look at that number of business owners, many of them, their annual revenues are under $250,000, right? They may only be a solo practitioner. They might not have any employees. And many of them are using mobile technology. Once you get outside, so for those folks that are participating, we are in the Washington metropolitan area, Washington, D.C. And once you get outside this area, you get into rural areas, they don't have access to broadband internet the way that we do in this space. And so for those business owners, a mobile phone or a tablet of some sort is their business. That is their office. And so when you talk about the need to protect, if you connect it, you need to protect it, whether that be a phone or any other device. And to your point about demystifying, I think it's just challenging for business owners. One client that we did some work for, this whole concept of cybersecurity was just so difficult for them. They were nurses. Her staff was nurses and doctors and directors who took care of people. They were caring, feeling kind of folks that wanted to take care of their clients. And they started doing business with the federal government and ran into these cybersecurity requirements that just threw them completely for a loop. Even their partners weren't accustomed to having to work in accordance with those regulations. And it all was like a foreign language. So this concept of being able to demystify is part of the reason that I host this series, right? Let's just talk about what this sounds like or what this looks like from a business standpoint, and let your technology people make the technology decisions for you, right? You make the decision as the owner of the business that you want to have a secure business, that you want to protect your employees, you want to protect your stakeholders. and your client's data, and you want to do that in a way that's cost effective for you as a business owner. And then let's have some technology discussions. Then let's get down to the nitty gritty of what type of file server and repudiation. You just don't hear that anymore. I know exactly what you're talking about with authentication and those things, but that's a difficult conversation to have with a business owner. I've talked a whole lot about smalls, but let's think about the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. He or she doesn't want to hear about that, right? They want somebody on their team to have that conversation. So this conversation really is about the types of things that folks in the C-suite need to pay attention to, because as the senior executive, you simply need to set the direction and the determination, and then you hire the right people to do the work that needs to be done, whether that is a third party that assists you if you're a small business, or that you direct your internal staff to be able to take care of that if you have a large corporation.
Yeah, I agree. And, as you stated that, I want to say to our C-suite folks here, as an encouragement, to know that you know. And and Angela, I'm sure would attest to this as well, where I've gone into environments to do an assessment with, sometimes it's, organizations have to comply with certain rules or regulations. And so I'll go into those environments to assess their environments so that, they want to know that they're in compliance. And often I've seen where there is a disparity between information or knowledge about the environment between the C-suite and workers, where either workers know or feel that the environment may not necessarily be so secure, or they know where the weaknesses are, but they're not telling the C-suite. C-suite thinks that their environment is secure because they may have purchased equipment or appliances or applications to put into their environment. But sometimes those things have not necessarily been either deployed accurately or kept up to date. And so I want my fellow C-suite folks here to be encouraged to know that you know. And don't be afraid to ask maybe difficult, or we'll call them tough questions, but they're not so tough. You just want proof from your folks that are working for you that you have come to rely on to provide you with that service.
That's a really great point that you made. So awareness, right? As the CEO, you don't necessarily need to understand all of the technical details, but you do want the truth when you ask the question. And so don't be afraid to ask the question, and don't be afraid to push back if people are giving you technical answers instead of answers in layman's terms. If they need to break it down to where the goats can get it, as one radio personality says, require that they do that in a way that keeps you informed about what is actually going on versus what people are telling you is going on. And that goes to leadership, right? If your staff, if your team knows that you genuinely care about them and you care about your clients and you want to do the right thing, then they'll share that information with you. If they're afraid that there are going to be consequences, or that you aren't really listening, and sometimes it can be hard to listen because we get so busy looking towards the future and trying to address things that are coming down the pipe. Like for anyone that's in government contracting right now, the executive order on vaccines is just like throwing people into a tizzy. But when you ask the question, make sure that you're getting answers that you understand. Because I'll tell you, if there is a data breach and there are some data loss, the forensics experts and the police or whatever investigators, they're going to come to you to look for the answers, right? You can point to a technical person, but the buck stops here, right? As the owner of the company, you're ultimately responsible for protecting the data that is in your possession and protecting your employees and your client resources. So thank you for sharing that. So let's talk about like if you had 3 things that you could share with our listeners about cybersecurity in this, larger, broader context about awareness, cybersecurity awareness, what would those be? And I'll tell you my three.
Okay. All right. First, I would say take it home. And what that means is that, of course, in business world, where we have these minds where, we want to do what's right and what's best to secure the assets that we have within our corporations. And the same thing ought to be true for your home. Just like you use IT at work, you use it at home. And again, being a purist, my wife in the beginning, she despised me when, I had to teach her about, securing and creating passwords, and that she couldn't just have one password for everything. And to make sure that, she would use biometrics as an example on her phone when she's, on each one of her applications. And so it's, I want everybody to take it home and make sure that your data and your information that is in your personal life is just as secure as your business life. And again, teach and promote it with your children as well, along with that. And the next point I would say is similar to what I mentioned about making sure that you communicate with your staff and know that you know. I would say that folks, don't be afraid of cybersecurity. It sounds like a big word, but in reality, it's a lot of simple practices that you can put in place for yourself and your corporation that can go a long way. And then lastly, I would say, which might be akin to don't be afraid, is don't look at it as a penalty. Cybersecurity by its nature is designed to promote your welfare, individually as well as from a corporate, and I don't necessarily mean that from a business perspective, but corporate meaning holistically, is there to promote the welfare of your IT environment. So those three things, again, are take it home, don't be afraid, and it's not a penalty.
Thank you. So I think if I had three things that I could share, anyone who's heard me talk about this before may already be familiar. I think that leadership is key, right? So as the owner of the company, be cyber aware. There are threats that are happening that are unique to your industry. So what's happening for companies that do what I do are different than what's happening for companies that do what you do. So you need to understand what those are so that you can make informed business decisions, right? So that would be my first recommendation. The second would be to make sure that you have some form of cyber insurance protection in place. And I know that's easier said than done, right? It's very easy for me to say simply have cyber insurance, because when you go to seek out cyber insurance, then you'll find that there's some other things that you have to do in order to put them in place. The mere act of doing the research that's necessary to find out what that is informative to you as a business owner and will help you to understand the task that lies ahead of you, right? So you know what the threats are that you're being faced with, you know what the tasks are that you would have to do to protect yourself, the numbers associated with the ransomware payments that are happening. And that is one of the most common forms of cyber attack that happens currently are these ransomware attacks. And folks of all sizes go, yeah, it's not going to happen to me, or I already did my backups, or all these things that folks can tell you about how protected they are. You've seen it in the news. $11 million in ransomware payments, $4 million in ransomware payments. And when we start talking small businesses, $1 million in ransomware payments, your general liability insurance will likely not pay for that. And even if you have a cyber policy, There are changes that are happening with claims being denied because people say that they put something in place and haven't effectively put that in place. And a cyber attack of that nature can put you out of business. So make sure that you've got some cyber insurance in place. And then my third thing would be, and this kind of ties back to what Steve talked about, putting a cybersecurity plan, a cybersecurity strategy in place, getting cyber insurance, making sure that you've taken a cyber pledge. These are all things that can create a competitive advantage for you. When, depending on who you do business with, if you're doing business in the public sector, cybersecurity is in the process of becoming and will eventually become a game changer. Yes or no as to whether or not you can do business. There was a solicitation that was released by the General Services Administration last year, or GSA. This was a 13-year contract award, right? So it's essentially a phishing license, but it gives you the ability to provide IT services across any executive agency for 13 years. And one of the deciding factors was whether or not you had a cybersecurity plan in place. So for those companies that have one and got it approved, they get a 13-year contract. And for those companies that don't, you've got now a 13-year window that you have to wait to even be able to compete for any of that work. And when you start looking at the private sector in particular, because of COVID and because of climate change, the private sector is looking at sustainability, environmental impacts, business continuity, and cybersecurity is a huge component of that. So when you are submitting your RFPs, when you're responding to or submitting proposals, they're looking to see what you're doing from a cybersecurity standpoint. And so if you're able to implement those things, you have one thing over, you have yet one more thing over your competition. So I would say, look at cybersecurity as a competitive advantage. And as Steve said, not a penalty, because it can be a game changer for you. And I see that we've got a question. So I'm gonna take a look up here and see what, I see that Lois is saying this is great insights on an important topic. So thank you, Lois, for sharing that. So now as we talk about changes that are happening in those environments, what I'm seeing more and more in the federal marketplace is the Department of Defense. And Steve, we've both worked there. My dad was in the department. My dad was in the Army, and that's what moved us to Washington, D.C. He worked at the Pentagon a long time ago before you started working there. So very familiar with that environment. The Department of Defense has implemented a number of new cybersecurity regulations that are lengthy in the amount of time that it takes to implement them and costly in terms of implementation. And companies that wait or think that they're not serious will find out that that the Department of Defense is pretty serious about those. And I'm now starting to see those trickle into civilian procurements as well. I'm not sure if you're seeing those as well.
Yes.
Yeah. And then in the private sector, again, this convergence of environmental, social, and overall governance matters. Cybersecurity fits in there because employees, for instance, are looking to see how responsible a corporation you are. They want to work for companies that care about the environment. They want to work for companies that will protect their data if they are, in this day and age, forced to share that data with you. And so it can really be a huge game changer for you if you start to look at cybersecurity in that instance. So let's talk about another executive order, because we're seeing a whole slew of those coming out with this new administration. So shortly after the Colonial and the JSB cyber attacks, and I will tell you, I've been in IT and cybersecurity as long as you have, and I was amazed that, and I'll give a little bit of context in case folks don't know what I'm talking about. There were two cyber breaches that happened within a relatively short period of time that made national news, because one of them affected our gas pipelines and the other affected global distribution of pork and beef around the country. And when they reported that to the FBI, they actually went and got some of the money back. And that was the first that I've seen that happen, because I've watched I've worked with a lot of customers who have had these ransomware, generally they ask for the funds in Bitcoins, and Bitcoins are extremely difficult to track. And even when they don't request them in Bitcoins, they open the account, they get the money, they close the account, and by the time that you and or the bank figure out about it, the hackers are long gone with that money. So the Biden administration has come up with a executive order on cybersecurity that was related to those, but really was a result of that SolarWinds attack, where the federal agencies were using a single software solution that then got hacked and affected Microsoft as well. So what do you think about that executive order? How do you think that's going to affect us as business owners? And when do you think we're going to start seeing that take effect?
Yeah, so as far back as really President Obama, we started to see cybersecurity become part of federal legislation. And even recently, now you hear Apple as an example stating that there's increased need for legislation to get created that will further help to penalize and restrict use of the internet, how we use it, as well as if people are bad actors and act irresponsibly, how do they get penalized? So as far back as President Obama and now here with President Biden, we see an increased level of awareness, as well as now attempts to begin to put teeth into executive orders and ultimately maybe legislation that gets put in place. What that is going to translate to for us as business owners are, as it should, creating a factor that makes us want to be culpable for our assets and resources. And therefore, if you are not, what you might want to start doing is having some portion of your operating budget go to your IT/cybersecurity as a planned expense for yourself. As Angela mentioned, cyber insurance or some other things. But the point is that our expense for cyber and cybersecurity is going to increase. And if you are a defense contractor, you are probably aware of CMMC requirements that DoD is beginning to prepare to push down into the defense industrial base, meaning all of us contractors, where we will be required to have a certain level of maturity within our organization before we can be awarded a contract, even as Angela mentioned, with a 13-year contract. And by virtue of just those contracts alone, which I mentioned, the number of small businesses and how that equates to, how many people are employed in America. The Department of Defense is a large employer of small business. So ultimately, the civilian world will be impacted by the nature of wanting to do business with DoD or the federal government. So it's coming. Within the past 5 years, 3 CIOs of federal entities have been fired because cybersecurity practices were not in place for their particular agencies. It's going to bleed down into our businesses. It's going to cost us an increase in our expense. And to Angela's point, the sooner we start building in our practices now, the less costly that it'll be for us in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. The cost associated with implementation, while it can take while it can take some time, and you may not have thought about it, the cost of a cyber incident is even worse and can put you out of business. So it makes sense to even just start small. One of the simplest things that you can do, and I hate to go down this technology path, but one of the simplest things that you can do is to start using what's called multi-factor authentication, where you turn on those options on your phone and on your bank account and then your email, where it is not just your name and password, but it's your name and password and some other identifying information, either a phone call or facial recognition or a text message that you receive. Because depending on which service you're using, for instance, your bank, in particular business bank, right? The business bank, the banks don't want anyone taking your money. So the banks want to help you to make sure that your account is secure. And what you will find, if you do any international travel and you have a business bank account, when they start seeing things, they'll notify you. Hey, we think this might be some fraud, right? So then it's not just you alone that's trying to protect the business. You have other systems and organizations that are supporting you as you protect your business. And as I look at all of these executive orders, so I mentioned the one about the vaccines right now, this is just a trickle down effect. And so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the size. I was just talking to a business owner. It's like, well, there's just two of us. Yeah, but a hacker can get a whole lot of money from two people, right? And so, keep in mind that the size of your company, while it is important to you as a business owner, and it's important for you to be able to grow from a hacker's perspective, that actually makes you even all the more attractive because it is a small company. And as we grow, and I talked about sharing this pledge on social media, as we communicate through marketing and social media, hackers are also paying attention to that, right? So, hey, we just won this great contract with, Marriott Corporation. Oh, let me go see if I can find some weaknesses in that relationship between you and Marriott. So this regulation, these regulatory requirements that you see are really designed to get everybody on the same page and focused on trying to combat these cyber issues. You mentioned the Obama administration. I can recall when that administration started working on the National Infrastructure Protection Plan, which ties directly to these two recent breaches with the oil pipeline and the food distribution service, because although they don't make the news every day, these types of incidents are happening on a regular basis. Folks are going after going after the electrical grid. They're going after the water sources. There are individuals both, and so this we've talked about before in this forum, insiders, right? You have an employee or a contractor who is either negligent, they're just not paying attention, and they may not be paying attention because they're under stress, but they make a mistake that then allows someone to get access to a system. And, they do things like turn all of the lights within all of the traffic lights within a certain part of the city, turn them all green at the same time. So now you're talking about life and death situations. So while it is a regulatory burden for small businesses, it's good for the country. It's good for us as business owners as a whole. So you may want to read that if you haven't already done so and just get familiar with it. So we are down to our last couple of minutes here. Steve, I'll ask you if you had one piece of advice regarding the business of cybersecurity for our listeners today, what would that be?
Okay. Again, from the purist perspective, I'm used to creating frameworks and methodology for businesses to apply to their environments. And so this is my last thing for you guys to take away. I've created something I call the 5 Ps of security, and they are all related to cybersecurity. So one is establish a cybersecurity program, your overarching framework, how you want to do cybersecurity in your organization. Establish cybersecurity policies, or a policy at least, that will govern how that program runs. Angela has mentioned this a couple of times, establish a cybersecurity plan by which you are continuing to improve upon your cybersecurity program. And then you want to have policies and practices by which you and your employees follow. Those 5 Ps will carry you a long way to keeping your environments secure. So that's my last takeaway for everybody.
Thank you so much. All right, so I'm going to check to see if we have any questions from our participants today. If you do, you can go ahead and enter those in the chat. And I'll just keep an eye on that for a hot second here. And while we're waiting for those, Steve, I just want to thank you for joining us today for the Cyber Savvy CEO. This is where we discuss the business side of cybersecurity from the C-suite perspective. So as we finish up, the recording for today's session will be distributed through email, and it'll also be available on the Cyber Savvy CEO YouTube channel. And I just want to finish out by wishing everyone a successful Cyber Awareness Month. Hopefully you've caught a couple of little gems that you can take from here and incorporate into your business. And feel free to reach out to myself or to Steve if you have any questions. So thank you so much.
Angela, it's a pleasure being on, and I can talk about cybersecurity all day. And unfortunately, my wife doesn't allow me to talk about it too much at home. So you guys gave me an avenue to talk my passion. So thank you very much.
Good, good. Thank you so much for being with us today.